the whispers of distant horizons. The windswept plains of Nova Meridian stretched out like an endless canvas of muted bronze and silver, the colony's geodesic habitation domes rising from the landscape like mechanical flowers. Lieutenant Kai Novara stood at the observation post, her fingers tracing the holographic interface that mapped the outer system's edge. 23 years old and already the youngest tactical officer in Nova Meridian's planetary defense force, Kai had grown up hearing stories of the frontier. Her parents were among the original colonists, terraformers who had transformed this once hostile world into a fragile sanctuary of human hope. The colony represented humanity's most distant outpost, a beacon of survival nearly 300 light-years from Earth. "Anything unusual on the long-range scans?" called Warrant Officer Elena Rodriguez from her station. The control room hummed with the soft electronic chirps of monitoring equipment, a constant reminder of the thin membrane between survival and extinction. Kai frowned, adjusting the quantum resonance filters. "There's something odd, intermittent signal patterns that don't match any known stellar interference or communication protocols." The observation post was more than just a military installation. It was a lifeline, a first warning system for a colony that understood its vulnerability. Nova Meridian existed on the razor's edge of human exploration, surrounded by unknown territories that promised both wonder and potential annihilation. Elena walked over, her augmented reality contacts flickering with data streams. "Show me." The holographic display expanded, revealing a complex web of signal traces. They were subtle, ghost-like whispers that seemed to shimmer at the edge of detectability. Most computer systems would have filtered them out as background noise, but Kai had developed an intuitive sense for anomalies. "These aren't random," she muttered. "They're structured, almost deliberate." The colony's early warning systems had been designed with multiple contingencies. Humanity had learned harsh lessons from its first interstellar encounters. Every colony was a fortress, every communication a potential threat vector. Governor Marcus Reyes entered the control room, his weathered face a map of decades of frontier living. Unlike the younger generation who saw the stars as a canvas of opportunity, Reyes understood them as a potential canvas of destruction. "Report, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had seen too many potential disasters to be easily alarmed. Kai brought up the signal analysis. "Unusual transmission patterns from the Epsilon Quadrant. They don't match any known natural phenomena or our current communication databases." Reyes studied the display, his cybernetic eye, a replacement after a mining accident years ago, scanning the data with inhuman precision. "Have you attempted to decode or analyze the source?" "Negative, sir," Kai responded. "But the signal's complexity suggests an artificial origin. It's not random stellar radiation or quantum fluctuations." Elena's hands danced across her interface, running sophisticated algorithmic filters. "The signal has a recursive pattern. It's repeating, but with minute variations each cycle." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood. In the vast, cold darkness of space, a repeating signal meant only one thing: something was trying to communicate. Governor Reyes activated the colony's primary communication channel. "I want a full diagnostic of our long-range sensors. Triangulate the signal's origin and prepare a detailed report within the next 6 hours." The control room erupted into controlled chaos. Technicians and analysts began running complex simulations, trying to unravel the mystery of the strange transmission. Kai felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Every colonist knew the stories, tales of first contacts that had gone catastrophically wrong, of civilizations destroyed by misunderstandings or technological disparities. Nova Meridian had been established with defense as its first priority, its infrastructure designed to be both a sanctuary and a fortress. As the day progressed, the signal continued its enigmatic dance at the edge of their detection range. It was patient, persistent, almost sentient in its methodical transmission. By nightfall, the colony was on high alert. The geodesic dome's exterior defenses hummed with increased power, quantum shielding systems primed and ready. Mining operations continued, but with heightened security protocols. Agricultural zones were monitored more closely, every drone and sensor attuned to potential threats. In her quarters that evening, Kai reviewed the signal data repeatedly. Something about its structure nagged at her, a pattern just beyond comprehension, like a half-remembered melody. Little did she know that thousands of light-years away, something was also watching, waiting, preparing. The frontier had always been about survival, but survival was never guaranteed, the silent approach. The Krelvax Collective was not a civilization, it was an organism. Spread across 17 star systems, connected by quantum entanglement networks that predated human recorded history, the Krelvax existed as a singular consciousness divided into multiple physical forms. Each member was both an individual and a collective node, their thoughts flowing like liquid mercury between organic minds and advanced computational matrices. High Coordinator Zaranel stood at the central nexus of the primary thought chamber, her biomechanical form a seamless fusion of crystalline neural networks and living tissue. Around her, holographic representations of star charts, planetary analyses, and complex probability matrices shifted and danced. The human colony, she vocalized, though vocalization was a simplistic term for the multidimensional communication that transpired, represents an anomaly in our predictive models. To her right, tactical architect Rintok materialized, not physically, but as a projected consciousness. His form was more angular, resembling a fractal construct of intersecting energy patterns. "Anomalies are opportunities," he responded, his thoughts cascading through the collective consciousness. The Krelvax had been observing humanity for centuries, not as potential conquerors, but as a complex problem to be analyzed, understood, and ultimately categorized. Humanity was unique, a species that demonstrated remarkable adaptability coupled with an almost chaotic unpredictability. Their initial studies had revealed fascinating contradictions. Humans were capable of unprecedented technological leaps, yet simultaneously prone to self-destructive behaviors. They could construct intricate mathematical models predicting galactic phenomena, and then engage in conflicts over relatively trivial territorial disputes. The Nova Meridian colony, Zaranel continued, represents a strategic testing point. Its location at the current expansion frontier makes it an ideal observation target. The thought chamber pulsed with accumulated data. Millennia of observational records flickered through quantum memory banks, each human interaction, each technological development, meticulously catalogued and analyzed. Rintok's consciousness rippled with what, in a more primitive species, might have been called curiosity. The transmission sequence we've initiated will provoke a response, but the nature of that response remains probabilistic. Their communication was not linear. Each thought was simultaneously a question, an observation, a potential future, and a historical record. The quantum entanglement that connected the Krelvax allowed for communication that transcended traditional notions of time and space. The transmission they had been sending, the signal that had caught Lieutenant Kai Novara's attention, was more than a simple message. It was a complex probabilistic probe designed to elicit specific reactive patterns from the human colony. Each variation in the signal carried embedded quantum algorithms, capable of collecting microscopic amounts of information about the receiver's technological capabilities, psychological state, and potential response mechanisms. "We are not preparing for conquest," Zaranel communicated to the collective consciousness. "We are preparing for understanding." But understanding, for the Krelvax, was not a passive process. It was an active, often invasive exploration. Their history was filled with civilizations they had understood into non-existence, not through military conquest, but through comprehensive analytical deconstruction. Rintok's fractal form shifted, presenting a series of potential interaction scenarios. Probability matrix suggests a 62.7% chance of defensive response, 17.3% chance of diplomatic engagement, 20% chance of technological adaptation. The numbers were not just statistics. They were living predictions, quantum-entangled possibilities that could reshape themselves based on minute changes in observational data. Deep within the thought chamber, massive computational arrays processed the signal's return data. Each microsecond of the transmission carried terabytes of complex information, not just about the human colony's technological capabilities, but about its psychological infrastructure. What type of species would respond to an unknown signal? What drove their curiosity, their fear, their hope? The Krelvax did not see themselves as superior to other species. They saw themselves as a comprehensive analytical system, capable of understanding and categorizing complex systemic behaviors. Humanity was a particularly intriguing system. "Prepare secondary transmission protocols," Zaranel communicated. The thought rippled through the collective consciousness, a command and a suggestion simultaneously. The Nova Meridian colony was about to become the focal point of a study that would reshape their understanding of their place in the universe. And they had no idea what was coming. The crucible of first contact. The quantum resonance alarm shattered the routine of Nova Meridian's defense command like a hammer through glass. Commander Dominic Reicher felt the change before the first alert sounded. The fine hairs on the back of his neck prickled, a primal response that predated any technological warning system. Decades of frontier military service had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. "Multiple quantum displacement signatures," Lieutenant Kai Novara called out, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "There, not like anything in our database." The observation deck of Outpost Sentinel transformed. Holographic displays erupted with complex geometric patterns, not just visual representations, but living mathematical constructs that seemed to breathe and pulse with an alien intelligence. "Magnify Sector 9, Reicher ordered, his voice steady despite the electric tension crackling through the command center. The view shifted. What had moments ago been an empty stretch of space now teemed with impossible geometries. Ships, if they could be called ships, materialized like living fractals. They weren't constructed. They seemed to emerge as if space itself was giving birth to these crystalline entities. "No weapon signatures detected," Elena Rodriguez reported, her voice tight. "But that doesn't mean anything. These aren't conventional vessels." Dominic Reicher understood survival. He had spent 30 years protecting humanity's most distant colonies, watching civilizations clash at the edge of known space. This was different. This was something beyond conventional conflict. The Krelvax vessels didn't move through space. They translated. One moment they were distant. The next, they occupied multiple spatial coordinates simultaneously. Their existence seemed more like a mathematical equation than a physical reality. "Quantum shielding to maximum," Reicher commanded. "Activate the Einstein-Rosen bridge disruptors." Kai's hands flew across her console. The colony's defensive systems, technologies developed through decades of paranoid preparation, hummed to life. Massive energy collectors embedded in Nova Meridian's planetary core began charging quantum capacitors capable of generating localized spacetime distortions. No one spoke about the stories, the whispered tales of colonies that had vanished without a trace, of first contacts that ended in total extinction. The first communication came not as sound, not as light, but as a complex quantum algorithm that momentarily rewrote the ship's computational matrices. It was less a message and more a probe, a living mathematical construct designed to analyze, to understand. "They're scanning us," Elena whispered, "but it's not like any scan we've ever encountered. It's like they're reading our entire systemic infrastructure." Dominic watched the holographic displays. The alien vessels, if they could be called vessels, began to resonate, not with weapons, with something far more complex. They were creating interference patterns in spacetime itself. "Prepare quantum entanglement countermeasures," he ordered, "and get me a direct link to Governor Reyes." The colony held its breath. The first actual weapon discharge came unexpectedly, not from the aliens, from Nova Meridian itself. A massive quantum cannon, a defensive system so advanced it had never been fully tested, erupted from the planet's northern polar region. The weapon didn't fire traditional projectiles. It generated a localized spacetime disruption designed to unmake any incoming threat at the quantum level. The Krelvax vessels shifted. They didn't explode. They didn't retreat. They simply existed differently. Some portions of their geometric forms seemed to fold into dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Others resonated at frequencies that made the observation deck's displays flicker and dance. Quantum resonance at critical levels, Kai reported. Her voice was clinical, but her hands trembled slightly. There, communicating, but not with language, with probability matrices. Dominic Reicher understood then that this was not a battle. This was a conversation happening at a level of complexity humanity had only theorized about. The quantum cannon fired again and again. Each discharge was a question. Each alien geometric response was an answer. No lives were lost. No traditional damage was done, but something fundamental was changing. First contact was never about weapons. It was about understanding. And neither humanity nor the Krelvax would ever be the same again. Ripples of resistance. The aftermath of the quantum encounter transformed Nova Meridian more profoundly than any external threat ever could. Dr. Amara Okoro stood before the United Colonies Emergency Council, her presentation hologram casting a soft blue light across the stunned faces of humanity's most influential leaders. Behind her, a series of complex diagrams illustrated the unprecedented interaction with the Krelvax. This was not an invasion, she stated firmly. It was a comprehensive systems analysis. The council chamber, a massive orbital complex suspended above Earth, buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from every major human colony and government faction sat in tense silence. Some wore military uniforms, others bore the crisp tailoring of diplomatic corps. All shared the same expression of barely contained anxiety. Admiral Helena Takshi, her cybernetic eye scanning the data streams, spoke first. We lost 3 quantum communication relays during the encounter. Our defensive systems were probed at levels we've never experienced. Dr. Okoro nodded. As the lead xenological analyst who had been studying the data from Nova Meridian, she understood something the military minds struggled to comprehend. The Krelvax don't see us as a potential conquest. We're a complex system they're attempting to understand. On Nova Meridian, the consequences were even more immediate. Commander Dominic Reicher found himself at the center of a political and scientific maelstrom. The colony that had been the site of first contact was now under microscopic examination by every human research institution. They didn't destroy us, Lieutenant Kai Novara argued during a heated strategy session. But they didn't simply observe us either. It was like we were being analyzed at a fundamental level. The quantum cannon that had been Nova Meridian's primary defense was now a research site. Scientists worked around the clock, trying to understand how their weapon had interacted with the Krelvax vessels. Each analysis revealed more questions than answers. Planetary Governor Marcus Reyes understood the deeper implications. This changes everything, he told a closed session of colonial leadership. Our entire approach to potential alien encounters has been based on military preparedness. The Krelvax just demonstrated that conflict is not their primary mode of interaction. But not everyone saw it that way. The Terran Defensive Alliance, a powerful military-industrial complex that had grown fat on decades of frontier tension, saw the encounter as a threat. Their leaders began mobilizing resources, pushing for massive military expansion. We cannot allow an unknown entity to simply analyze human colonies, declared Admiral Kenneth Russo in a fiery speech that went viral across human communication networks. Today they scan. Tomorrow they might decide we're irrelevant. Political fractures began to emerge. Some colonies advocated for diplomatic engagement. Others demanded total military preparedness. Research institutions fought for resources to study the quantum data collected during the encounter. Dr. Okoro's team discovered something truly extraordinary. The Krelvax communication was not just a message. It was a form of distributed intelligence. Each quantum transmission carried multiple layers of information, mathematical probes that seemed designed to understand not just human technology, but human consciousness itself. "They're trying to comprehend us," she explained during a breakthrough presentation. "Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to truly understand." On Nova Meridian, the effects were most pronounced. Colonists who had been present during the encounter reported strange side effects: increased mathematical intuition, unexplained moments of collective insight. It was as if the quantum interaction had subtly altered their cognitive processes. Lieutenant Kai Novara experienced this most acutely. During routine system checks, she found herself anticipating computational solutions before her augmented interfaces could calculate them. Mathematical patterns seemed to dance at the edge of her perception. Commander Dominic Reicher watched these changes with a mixture of fascination and concern. The frontier had always been about survival, but now survival meant something entirely different. The Krelvax had not come with weapons. They had come with questions, and humanity was just beginning to understand the profound complexity of those questions. The threshold of transformation. 3 years after the initial encounter, the boundary between human and Krelvax understanding began to blur in ways no one could have predicted. The quantum research station orbiting Nova Meridian was unlike any scientific facility in human history. Its structure defied traditional architectural principles, a living matrix of crystalline computational nodes that seemed to breathe and pulse with intelligent energy. Dr. Amara Okoro stood at the central interface, her body partially merged with a quantum communication array. The line between her organic consciousness and the station's computational matrix had become increasingly nebulous. "Resonance frequency stabilizing," she communicated, though communicated was an inadequate term for the multidimensional exchange happening. Lieutenant Kai Novara watched from an observation deck, her own consciousness subtly altered by years of proximity to the Krelvax quantum interactions. The mathematical patterns that had once seemed alien now danced at the edges of her perception like familiar friends. The transformation had not been instantaneous. It had been a gradual process of mutual understanding that challenged every preconception of first contact humanity had ever imagined. The Krelvax had not come to conquer, they had come to understand, and in that process of understanding, both species had fundamentally changed. Commander Dominic Reicher, now leading the Interspecies Quantum Diplomacy Initiative, reviewed the latest data streams. The initial fear, the paranoid militaristic response that had characterized humanity's approach to the unknown, had given way to something more complex. Collaborative research stations now dotted the frontier, not military outposts, not defensive installations, but true centers of collective exploration. The quantum encounter had revealed something profound about both species. The Krelvax were not a unified consciousness in the way humans had initially understood. They were a distributed intelligence, a living network of probabilistic interactions that defied traditional concepts of individuality. Humanity, in turn, had been revealed as something more than its fractious, conflict-driven history suggested. Given the opportunity for true communication, human consciousness had demonstrated an unprecedented capacity for adaptation and understanding. Final harmonic calibration approaching. Dr. Okoro's multidimensional communication rippled through the station. What had begun as a potential conflict had become something else entirely, a dialogue, a mutual exploration of consciousness itself. The Quantum Research Station was more than a scientific facility. It was a living bridge between two fundamentally different ways of perceiving existence. Governor Marcus Reyes, now a key architect of interspecies diplomacy, watched the data streams with a sense of wonder that had long since replaced his initial fear. The colonies that had once prepared for war now prepared for something far more profound, a comprehensive reimagining of what it meant to be a sentient species in a vast, complex universe. Kai Novara approached the central interface. Her movement was fluid, almost mathematical. Years of quantum interaction had changed her in ways both subtle and profound. "Resonance alignment complete," she stated, though the words were merely a surface-level representation of a far more complex quantum communication. The Krelvax vessels, if they could be called vessels, no longer appeared as alien geometries. They were now understood as living computational matrices, each a node in a vast, distributed network of consciousness. Humanity had not been conquered. Humanity had been invited to understand. And in that understanding, both species had discovered something far more valuable than any territorial gain or technological advantage. A profound, fundamental connection that transcended the very concept of separation. The frontier was no longer a place of conflict. It was a threshold of transformation,